The girl bleeds in the middle of the midnight diner, and the world recoils from her like she is a loaded gun. No one will touch her. No one will look her in the eye. So the waitress steps forward, bare hands reaching for blood that should have burned her skin to ash, and what she doesn't know is that the child she is touching is the vampire king's daughter, and that this single, reckless kindness will set an ancient court on fire. The rain hammered against the leaded glass windows of the Ashen Rose Tavern, a relentless rhythm that matched the throbbing ache in Ilyar's feet. It was a night thick with the smell of wet wool, spilled ale, and the underlying metallic tang of fear that always permeated the air when the sun went down. In the kingdom of Oakhaven, night did not belong to humanity. It belonged to the Silver Court, and humans were merely allowed to exist within it, provided they kept their heads down and their blood inside their veins. Alara wiped a rag across the scarred oak of table 4. Her movements automatic. She was 23. Though the shadows beneath her eyes and the roughness of her hands made her look older. Her uniform was a drab gray, designed to make her blend into the stone walls, to make her invisible. Invisibility was the only armor a human had in a city ruled by immortals. Around her, the tavern hummed with a low, nervous energy. Tonight was the eve of the blood moon, a time when the vampire aristocracy grew restless. Their thirst sharper, their patience thinner. Alara. "Move it," the tavern master, a stout man named Goran, hissed as he passed her with a tray of roasted fowl. "The highborn are on the prowl tonight. If you're not serving, you're hiding. Those are the rules." "I know, Goran," she murmured, her voice barely rising above the din. She didn't look up. Eye contact was a challenge, and challenges were fatal. She moved to the back near the hearth, where the fire crackled, casting long dancing shadows against the soot-stained walls. The Ashen Rose was a neutral ground of sorts. It's one of the few places where lower-ranking vampires and humans coexisted. Though coexisted was a generous term. The vampires took the booths with the velvet cushions. The humans took the stools near the drafts. Suddenly, the heavy iron-bound door of the tavern crashed open. The silence that fell over the room was instant and absolute. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of prey sensing a predator that was far too large to fight. The wind howled through the open door, extinguishing half the candles in the room, plunging them into a gloom illuminated only by the dying fire. Standing in the threshold were 4 figures cloaked in midnight blue, the crest of the royal house's silver dragon coiled around a bleeding rose emblazoned on their chests. The Royal Guard. They were lethal, beautiful, and terrifyingly still, but it wasn't the guards that made the blood drain from Goran's face. It was the small figure standing between them. She looked no older than 10, a porcelain doll with hair like spun moonlight and eyes the color of amethyst. She wore a dress of crushed velvet that cost more than the tavern and everyone in it. Princess Isolde, the daughter of the king, the bloody daughter, they whispered. For her birth had reportedly cost her mother's life and sent the king into a century of cold, ruthless mourning. She did not look ruthless now. She looked frantic. "I told you I wanted to see the lower city." The child snapped, her voice high and imperious, though trembling. She pulled against the hand of the captain of the guard. "Father never lets me leave the citadel." "Highness, this is unsafe," the captain said, his voice a smooth, cold baritone. "The stench of—" He wrinkled his nose, glancing at the frozen human patrons. "Commoners. It is overwhelming." The girl yanked her arm free with surprising strength, stumbling backward. As she did, her heel caught on the uneven floorboards near the entrance. She flailed, crashing into a side table where a merchant had left a crate of glassware, specifically Silverland goblets meant for export. The crash was deafening in the silent room. Glass shattered. Silver flashed. A high-pitched scream pierced the air, not of anger, but of genuine, shocking pain. "My hand—" The princess had fallen directly onto the shards. Pure silver was anathema to their kind, burning their skin like acid. For a child of the royal bloodline whose senses were dialed to excruciating heights, the pain must have been blinding. Pandemonium threatened to erupt. The guards hissed, their fangs descending, their eyes turning a solid, glowing crimson. They drew their swords, turning outward toward the room as if the tavern itself had attacked the girl. Nobody moved. The captain roared, the sound vibrating in Alara's chest bones. Back, all of you. The patrons, human and lesser vampire alike, scrambled backward, overturning chairs, pressing themselves against the far walls. They were terrified. If the princess was hurt, the king would burn the block down. No one dared approach her. To touch royalty was death. To touch a bleeding vampire was suicide. The scent of her blood, rich and ancient, began to fill the room like the perfume of crushed lilies and copper. It had a strange effect. The lesser vampires in the room gripped the tables, their knuckles white, fighting the instinct to feed. The humans gagged, overwhelmed by the sudden heavy pressure in the air. Isolde sat amidst the broken glass, clutching her wrist. Blood, dark and viscous as pomegranate syrup, welled up between her fingers. She was sobbing, a raw, terrified sound that made her seem very small and very young. The silver shards were still embedded in her palm, sizzling faintly. The guards were too busy securing the perimeter, shouting threats at the cowering crowd. Their martial instincts overriding their nurturing ones. They were warriors, trained to kill assassins, not to soothe a crying child with a splinter. They hesitated to touch her wound, fearing they might cause more damage, or perhaps fearing the potency of her blood themselves. Alara didn't think. She didn't think about the laws. She didn't think about the fact that she was a waitress who made 3 coppers a night. She didn't think about the history of the king's wrath. She only saw a child crying. Alara pushed off the wall. Her boots thudded softly on the floorboards as she walked into the center of the room. "Stop!" a guard barked, leveling his blade at her throat. The tip hovered an inch from her jugular. Not another step. Human. Alara stopped, but she didn't look at the guard. She looked at Isolde. The girl's amethyst eyes met hers, wide with shock and pain. "She has silver in her hand," Ilara said, her voice shaking slightly but clear. "It's burning her. You can't just stand there guarding the door while she burns." The captain looked at the girl, then at Ilara. The dilemma paralyzed him for a split second, the protocols of security versus the immediate medical need. Ilara used that second. She ducked under the blade. A gasp rippled through the room. Goran covered his eyes. Ilara knelt on the floor amidst the broken glass, ignoring the shards that bit into her own knees. She reached out, her hands red and chapped from washing dishes in harsh lye soap, and hovered them over the princess's velvet sleeve. "Highness," Ilara said softly. "Look at me." Isolde sniffled, her chest heaving. She looked at Ilara. "I'm going to take the glass out," Ilara said, keeping her voice low and steady, a hum of calm in the chaotic room. "But I need you to be very brave. Can you be brave?" The girl nodded, tears spilling over her pale lashes. Ilara reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a clean, though frayed linen handkerchief she kept for polishing the good glasses. "This is going to hurt for a moment, and then it will stop." With steady hands, Ilara took the small, cold hand of the vampire princess. The temperature difference was startling. The girl felt like marble left out in the snow. Ilara didn't flinch. She didn't recoil from the blood that coated the girl's palm. Using her fingernails, Ilara gripped the largest shard of silver-laced glass. "Deep breath," she whispered. She pulled. Isolde cried out a sharp keening noise, but she didn't pull away. Ilara tossed the shard aside and immediately pressed the linen cloth against the wound, applying firm, gentle pressure. Ilara soothed, instinctively shifting so her body shielded the girl from the staring crowd. She used her other hand to brush the hair back from the girl's clammy forehead. "It's out. The poison is out. You're all right." The reaction in the room was palpable. The scent of the girl's blood was now mixed with the scent of Elero soap, rain, and warm humanity. She touched her highness," someone whispered in horror. The captain of the guard stepped forward, his face a mask of fury, realizing a human was manhandling the heir to the throne. "Get away from her, you filth." He raised his gauntlet hand to strike Alara, to knock her away from the royal personage. Alara saw the shadow of the blow coming. She didn't move. She couldn't move without letting go of Isolde's hand. And the girl was clinging to her now, her small fingers digging into Alara's wrist. Anchoring herself to the only source of comfort she had found, Alara braced for the impact. It never came. The tavern door didn't just open this time. It disintegrated. A wave of force, cold and crushing as the bottom of the ocean, slammed into the room. The windows blew inward, showering the floor with more glass. The candles didn't just go out. The wicks turned to ash. Darkness swallowed the room, save for a single pulsing aura of violet light that seemed to emanate from the figure standing in the doorway. He was tall, towering over the guards. He wore no cloak, only a fitted tunic of black leather and armor that seemed to be forged from shadows. His hair was black as a raven's wing, falling to his shoulders. And his face was a sculpture of cruel, unearthly perfection. Lord Kalen, the Blood Monarch. The king. The pressure in the room dropped to a level that made ears pop. Every vampire in the room, including the royal guards, dropped to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the dirty floorboards. The humans collapsed, unable to withstand the sheer weight of his presence. Alara couldn't bow. She was still kneeling, holding the princess's hand. She was the only thing moving in a room frozen by terror. Kalen stepped into the room. The floorboards didn't creak under him. The silence seemed to stretch to accommodate his stride. His eyes were burning not the red of the guards, but a deep, void-like purple that seemed to devour the light. He looked at the shattered glass. He looked at the cowering guards. And then he looked at Alara. He froze. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, the king of vampires stared at the tableau before him. A peasant girl, smelling of dishwater and fear, kneeling in the debris. Her hands, her bare human hands, were wrapped around his daughter's wrist. Her thumb was stroking the back of Isolde's hand in a rhythmic, soothing motion. And his daughter, his volatile, traumatized child who had screamed for days after her mother died, who flinched at the touch of her own tutors, was leaning into the human's touch. Isolde's crying had stopped. She was breathing in sync with the waitress. The king's gaze moved to Ilara's hands. They were stained with royal blood. By all the laws of his court, Alara should be dead. To spill royal blood was treason. To touch it was sacrilege. Kalen took another step. The air rippled. Key stopped 2 feet from them. Key was so close Alara could smell the scent of himozone, ancient iron, and something like a winter storm. "Daddy," Isolde gasped, her voice small. Alira's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. But she didn't let go. She kept the pressure on the wound. She let go, it would bleed again. That was the only logic her terrified brain could hold on to. Kalen ignored his daughter. His void-like eyes were locked on Alara's face. He tilted his head slightly. A predator examining something that didn't make sense. "You?" he said. His voice was not loud, but it resonated in the hollow of Alara's bones. It was a voice that commanded armies and leveled cities. "You are touching my air." Alara swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. She looked up. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She met the king's gaze. She was hurt. "My lord," Alara whispered. "The silver." I had to get it out. The captain of the guard, still prostrate on the floor, dared to speak. "Sire," she interfered. "I was about to silence," Kalen said. He didn't look at the captain. He flicked a finger, and the captain was thrown backward against the wall by an invisible force, pinned there, choking. Kalen crouched down. It was a fluid, graceful movement. He was now eye level with Alara. Up close, he was terrifyingly beautiful, his skin pale as moonlight, the lines of his face sharp enough to cut. He reached out. His hand, large and gloved in black leather, moved toward Alara's hands. Alara flinched, expecting him to rip her hands away, perhaps to tear them off entirely as punishment for the defilement. Instead, he gently took Isolde's wrist, his fingers brushing against Alara's. The contact sent a shock through her, cold and electric. He inspected the wound beneath the cloth Alara held. The bleeding had slowed. The angry red welts from the silver were already fading, soothed by the removal of the metal. "You remove the silver with your bare fingers," Kalen murmured, seemingly to himself. "It burns us, but it does not burn you." "No, my lord. And you did not fear the blood." He looked at the red stains on her skin. "Most of your kind would run. Or try to steal it to sell to the alchemists." "She is a child," Alara said, her protective instinct flaring up despite the impossible danger. She was in pain. That's all that matters. Kalen stared at her. The violet fire in his eyes dimmed slightly, replaced by a profound, calculating curiosity. He looked at his daughter, who was clutching Elara's sleeve with her uninjured hand. "Isolde," the king said softly, "does it hurt?" "She made it stop," Isolde whispered, looking at Alara with adoration. "She smells nice, Papa, like rain." Kalen looked back at Alara. The intensity of his gaze felt like a physical weight. He slowly peeled his glove off, revealing a hand that was pale, strong, and ringed with dark silver. He reached out and placed his bare hand over Eliris, which was still pressing the cloth to his daughter. He didn't pull her away. He covered her hand with his own, sealing the bandage in place. "What is your name?" he asked. "Alara, my lord." "Alara." He tested the name, the sound of it rolling off his tongue like a spell. "You have done the crown a service tonight." He stood up, towering over her again. He didn't offer her a hand to rise. That would be too much a break in protocol. But he did something almost as shocking. He turned to the room, to the frozen patrons, and the terrified tavern master. "This woman is under my protection," Kalen announced. His voice carried to every corner of the tavern, to the street outside. "If any harm comes to Herf, a hair on her head is out of place, I will raise this establishment to the ground and salt the earth." He looked back down at her. "Come, you will finish tending to her." Akila blinked. "My lord." "You calmed her when my own guard could not," Kalen said, his tone brooking no argument. "You will accompany us to the citadel. My physicians will heal the wound, but you will ensure she remains calm." "I can't leave," Alara stammered, glancing at Goran. "My shift." Kalen looked at Goran. The tavern master was shaking so hard his teeth rattled. "Your shift is over," the king said coldly. "Permanently." He gestured to the guards who were still standing. "Escort her." Before Alara could protest, before she could even untie her apron. She was surrounded by the royal guard, but this time their swords were sheathed. They weren't looking at her with contempt anymore. They were looking at her with confusion and a healthy dose of fear. For the king himself was watching her with an expression that no one had seen on his face in 100 years, intrigued, as they led her out into the rain. The king swept his cloak over his daughter, but his gaze lingered on Alara's hands, the human hands that had dared to touch what was forbidden, and in doing so had changed the fate of the kingdom. The carriage ride was a suffocating experience, wrapped in velvet and silence. The vehicle itself was a masterpiece of dark engineering, its wheels gliding over the cobblestones with barely a tremor, suspended by magic that dampened every bump. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of leather and the faint, lingering scent of dried roses. Alara sat on the edge of the plush seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to make herself as small as possible. She was acutely aware of the grime on her apron, the smell of the tavern that clung to her hair, and the mud on her boots that was staining the pristine floor mats. Opposite her sat the king. Kalen did not slouch. He occupied the space with a regal, predatory stillness. His violet eyes were fixed on the window, watching the rain-slicked streets of the lower city blur past. But Alara felt his attention on her like a physical weight. He was studying her reflection in the dark glass, dissecting her posture, her breathing, the frantic pulse fluttering in her neck. Beside him, Princess Isolde had curled up, her head resting against her father's arm. But her hand, the uninjured one, was reached across the gap, gripping the hem of Alara's skirt. It was a lifeline. The child was exhausted, her adrenaline crash leaving her pale and trembling. But she refused to close her eyes, watching Alara as if afraid the human woman would vanish if she blinked. "You are trembling." Kellen's voice broke the silence. It wasn't a question. He didn't turn his head from the window. "I am cold, my lord," Ilara lied. She wasn't cold. The carriage was warm. She was terrified. She was sitting across from a being who had ruled Oakhaven for 600 years. A being whose temper was legendary and whose mercy was non-existent. Kalen turned then, his gaze sweeping over her thin, gray uniform. He reached for a heavy fur throw folded on the seat beside him, black wool fur, thick and lustrous. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it across the carriage. It landed heavily on Ilara's lap. "Cover yourself," he commanded. "It does not do for the crown's guest to freeze." Lara hesitated, her fingers brushing the soft fur. It was worth more than her life. "Thank you, my lord." She pulled it around her shoulders, the warmth instant and overwhelming. It smelled like Hymozone and storm. Why did you help her? The question was quiet, stripping away the pretense of the weather. Kalen leaned forward slightly, the shadows of the carriage carving sharp angles into his face. "You know who I am? You know what she is? The instinct of your kind is to run from mine, to hide. Yet you walked into the center of the room and put your hands on her." Alara looked down at Isolde, who was fighting sleep, her eyelids drooping. "Fear is a loud thing, my lord. But pain ... Pain is louder. When a child is hurting, you don't ask who her father is. You just stop the hurting." Kalen studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "A simple philosophy. One that is rare in my court. In the Citadel, pain is currency. Compassion is a weakness to be exploited." "Then I would not do well in your court," Alara murmured, instantly regretting her boldness. A flicker of something amusement. Respect crossed Kellen's face. "We shall see." The carriage began to ascend. Ilara could feel the change in gravity as they climbed the winding causeway that led to the Citadel. The mood shifted. The noise of the city, the shouting, the carts, the life faded away, replaced by the whistling of the wind. They were entering the silent city, the district of the high-born vampires, perched atop the cliffs overlooking the sea. When the carriage finally stopped, the door was opened from the outside by a footman in livery so stiff it looked like armor. The rain had turned to a mist here, swirling around the massive stone gargoyles that guarded the entrance to the palace. The Citadel was not just a castle. It was a mountain of black stone carved into spires and arches that defied gravity. A Gothic monument to eternal power. Kalen stepped out first, his movement fluid. He turned and scooped Isolde up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. The girl whimpered, burying her face in his neck. "Come," he said to Alara. Alara stepped out, clutching the fur wrap. The courtyard was vast, lit by braziers burning with blue flame. Rows of servants vampires, all with pale skin and efficient, silent movements, were lined up, heads bowed. They didn't look at the king, but Alara could feel their eyes darting toward her, the human intruder in their midst. The hostility in the air was sharp and cold. They moved through the great doors, into a hallway that soared upward into darkness. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting their footsteps. It was beautiful, breathless, and utterly devoid of life. No flowers, no warmth, no sound. Just stone and power. "Fetch Varin." Kalen ordered a passing servant without stopping. "Have him meet us in the princess's chambers immediately." "At once." "Sire," the servant vanished into the shadows. They ascended a spiraling staircase, passing tapestries that depicted ancient wars and blood oaths. Alara's legs burned from the climb, but she forced herself to keep pace with the king's long strides. They finally reached a set of double doors carved with roses, painted in white and gold, the only bright spot Alara had seen so far. Isolde's room was vast, bigger than the entire tavern floor. It was filled with toys, porcelain dolls, intricate clockwork animals, shelves of books, but it felt untouched, like a museum exhibit rather than a child's sanctuary. Kalen laid Isolde gently on the massive four-poster bed, which was draped in silks the color of dawn. "Stay with her, Kalen," ordered Alara. Stepping back as he heard footsteps approaching, Alara approached the bed. Isolde was shivering, her face flushed. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind the throbbing pain of the wound. Alara sat on the edge of the mattress, ignoring the urge to check if she was dirtying the sheets. She took Isolde's uninjured hand. "It's going to be all right," Alara whispered, smoothing the hair back from the girl's forehead. "You're safe now. You're home." "It burns," Isolde whimpered, clutching her wrist. The doors burst open. A tall, gaunt vampire with spectacles perched on a sharp nose strode in, carrying a black leather satchel. This was Varan, the royal physician. He ignored Alara completely, rushing to the king and bowing low. "Sire, I came as soon as I heard." "An accident?" "Silver," Kalen said, his voice tight. "She fell." "There was broken glass," Varan hissed. "A sound of pure distaste. Silver, filthy substance. Let me see." He approached the bed, his movements clinical and rough. He reached for Isolde's hand. Isolde shrank back, pulling her hand away. "No, it hurts. Don't touch it." "Highness, I must inspect the damage to apply the salve," Varan said, his tone impatient. He reached for her again, his long, cold fingers looking like spider legs. Isolde screamed. A high panic sound and scrambled backward against the headboard, kicking out. "No, go away. I want Alara." Varan froze, looking confused. He finally looked at Alara, his eyes narrowing in disgust. "Who is this? Why is there a human in the royal chambers? Get her out. She is contaminating the sterile field." "She stays," Kalen said from the foot of the bed. His arms were crossed, his face unreadable. "Sire, surely you jest," Varan scoffed, adjusting his spectacles. "The girl is a peasant. She carries disease, dirt. Her heart rate is distracting the princess." He turned to Alara. "Shoo, girl. Go wait in the hall, or better yet, the stables." Kellara stood up. The insult stung, but she was used to insults. What she wasn't used to was the look of absolute terror on Isolde's face. The girl was hyperventilating, her small chest heaving. Her fangs lengthening in distress, a dangerous thing for a child who couldn't control her thirst or her power. If she panicked, she could lash out, hurting herself or even the physician. "She is scared of you," Alara said, her voice quiet but firm. Varan bristled. "She is a child. She does not know what she needs. I am the finest healer in the kingdom. I do not need advice from a serving wench." He lunged for Isolde's arm again, intending to restrain her to treat the wound. Isolde's eyes glowed bright crimson. The air in the room crackled. A vase on the nightstand exploded. "Stop!" Alara shouted. She didn't step back. She stepped forward, placing her body between the physician and the child. Varan snarled, dropping his bag. "You dare block me. You are making it worse." Alara snapped, her fear forgotten in the face of the child's distress. She turned her back on the furious vampire physician and faced Isolde. She didn't reach out. She just held her hands open, palms up. "Isolde," Alara said, pitching her voice to a low melodic hum. "Look at me. Just me." Isolde was gasping, tears streaming down her face, her magic lashing out, rattling the window panes. But she locked eyes with Alara. "Do you remember the song?" Alara asked. "Improvising? The one about the rain?" Isolde shook her head frantically. "It goes like this," Alara whispered. She began to hum a simple folk tune, one her mother had sung to her. It wasn't a song of high courts or magic. It was a song about a river finding its way to the sea. Alara slowly sat on the bed. She didn't grab the girl, she just sat there, a warm, solid presence in the chaotic room. She continued to hum, the vibration soothing the jagged edges of the magic in the air, slowly. The red faded from Isolde's eyes, returning to amethyst. The rattling of the windows stopped. The girl crawled forward, collapsing into Alara's arms. "It hurts." She sobbed into Alara's chest. "I know," Alara murmured, stroking her hair. "But we have to fix it. I will hold you. I won't let go. But you have to let the doctor look at it." Can you do that for me? Isolde sniffled, looking up. You won't leave. I'm right here. Isolde nodded weakly and extended her injured arm. Alara looked over her shoulder at Varen. The physician looked stunned, his mouth slightly open. He looked at the king. Kaelin nodded once, a sharp, imperceptible movement. Varen approached slowly this time, his arrogance dampened. Thaw. He opened a jar of salve that smelled of mint and graveyard dirt. He applied it to the wound. The steam rose, as the magic knit the flesh back together, purging the last of the silver residue. It was agonizing as Isolde gripped Illyra's hands so hard she thought her bones would crack. And she cried out into Illyra's shoulder, but she didn't thrash. She didn't explode. She endured it, anchored by the human woman holding her. When it was done, Varen wrapped the hand in white silk. It is finished, he said stiffly. She needs rest. The silver drains the vitality. She will sleep for a day, perhaps two. Stolda was already asleep, her grip on Alara loosening. Kara carefully laid her back against the pillows, tucking the blankets around her chin. The girl looked peaceful now, the terror gone. Varen packed his bag. He shot Alara a look of venomous dislike, then bowed to the king. I will check on her tomorrow evening, sire. Leave us, Kaelin said. Varen hurried out, leaving the king and the waitress alone in the dim, quiet room. Alara stood up. Her legs were shaking. Now that the crisis was over, the reality of where she was came crashing down on her. She was in the king's private chambers. She had shouted at the royal physician. She was likely going to be executed. She kept her head down, wiping her hands on her apron. I should go, my lord. She is sleeping. Go where? Kaelin asked. He walked over to the window, looking out at the storm. Back to the tavern, to serve ale to drunks who do not know your name. It is my life, my lord. It was your life, Kaelin corrected. He turned to face her. The violet fire in his eyes was dim now, thoughtful. You have a gift, Alara, or perhaps it is simply a quality that my kind has lost. You possess stillness, warmth, just like children, Alara said defensively. Isolde is not a child. She is a fledgling ancient. She is a predator in a small body. Burdened with grief she cannot process and power she cannot control. Since her mother died, Kaelin paused, a shadow crossing his face, a crack in the marble mask. Since the queen passed, Isolde has allowed no one to touch her. Not her nurses, not her tutors, not me. Alara looked at the sleeping girl. She is lonely. She is terrified, Kaelin said. She sees monsters everywhere, even in the mirror. But she does not see a monster in you. He walked toward Alara, closing the distance. The air grew heavy again. I require your service. Alara took a step back. My lord, I know nothing of courts or etiquette. I am a waitress. I dropped out of school when I was 12 to work. I do not need you to teach her calculus or history. I have scholars for that, Kaelin said dismissively. I need you to be present, to be the anchor. When the panic takes her, you bring her back. When she breaks things, you fix them. When she bleeds, you do not flinch. You want me to be a nanny? Alara said, the words slipping out before she could check them. I want you to be her companion, Kaelin corrected. You will live here in the citadel. You will be paid generously, more in a month than you would make in 10 lifetimes at the Ashen Rose. You will have your own chambers, your own staff. It sounded like a dream. It sounded like a trap. And if I refuse? Alara asked. She had to know. Kaelin smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of the wolf who has cornered the rabbit. You are intelligent. You know the answer to that. He wouldn't let her leave. She knew too much. She had touched the air. She had seen the king's vulnerability. She walked out those gates. She would disappear before she reached the bottom of the hill. Alara lifted her chin. I have conditions. Kalain's eyebrows rose. Conditions? You bargain with your king. If I am to stay, I need to be able to send money to my sister in the lower city. She is sick. She needs medicine. Kaelin said instantly. The royal physicians will attend to her. She will be cured by morning. Elara blinked. Just like that. A problem that had plagued her for years, solved with a wave of his hand. This was the power of the highborn. Okay? And Elara added, her voice trembling slightly. I will not be food. For you? Or for her? Or for your guards? Kellen's eyes darkened, stepped closer, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. She could feel the cold radiation of his skin. You have my word, Elara. You are under my protection. No one will drink from you, not even me. His gaze dropped to her neck where her pulse was hammering, then back to her eyes. Though I admit, the scent is tempting. You smell of life. 'Tis distinct. He pulled back before Elara could faint. My steward will show you to your quarters. They are adjoining Isolde's rest. Your duties begin when she wakes. He turned and walked back to his daughter's bedside, sitting in a high-backed chair to keep vigil. He dismissed Elara without another word. Elara turned and walked to the door. Her heart was racing, her mind spinning. She had survived the night. She had risen from a tavern wench to a royal companion in the span of an hour. She was safe. But as the heavy doors closed behind her, shutting her in the silent stone corridor, Elara didn't feel safe. She felt like she had just walked into the dragon's den, and the dragon had decided to keep her not to eat, but to watch. And she wasn't sure which was more dangerous. A severe-looking woman in a high collard black dress was waiting for her in the hall. Follow me, she said, her voice dry as parchment. They walked deeper into the citadel. The hallways were endless, lined with suits of armor that seemed to watch them pass. Elara was led to a room next to the nursery. These are your quarters, the woman said, opening the door. Elara stepped inside and gasped. The room was magnificent. A fireplace roared with a magical smokeless fire. A bed huge enough for 3 people dominated the space, piled with furs and silks. There was a private bathing chamber with a copper tub that was already steaming. A wardrobe stood open, filled with dresses not gray wool, but deep blues and greens, velvet and silk, cut in the style of the court, but modest enough for a servant. Dinner will be brought up shortly, the woman said. Do not leave this wing. The citadel is vast, and there are areas where accidents happen to those who wander. The door clicked shut. Elara heard the lock turn. She wasn't a guest, she was a prisoner. Pampered, protected prisoner, but a prisoner nonetheless. Elara walked to the window. It looked out over the jagged cliffs and the churning black ocean below. The rain lashed against the glass. Somewhere down there in the smog and the grime was her old life. Her sister, the tavern, the fear of unpaid rent. That was gone now. She walked to the mirror. The girl staring back looked the same tired eyes, messy brown hair escaping her bun, a smudge of soot on her cheek. But she was different. She had touched the monster and lived. She stripped off the dirty uniform, the gray wool falling to the floor in a heap. She walked into the bathing chamber and sank into the hot water. It stung her chapped hands, her tired feet. She scrubbed her skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the smell of the tavern, the smell of fear. But she couldn't wash away the sensation of Kellen's cold hand covering hers. The weight of his gaze, the violet fire. Elara closed her eyes and sank beneath the water, holding her breath. She was in the eye of the storm now, and for the sake of the little girl with the sad eyes and the silver burns, she had to learn how to survive the hurricane. The next 2 days passed in a blur of quiet luxury and mounting tension. Isolde slept, trapped in the healing coma. Elara did not leave the suite of rooms. She explored her cage. She read books from the shelf histories of the vampire wars, treatises on magic she couldn't understand. She ate rich food brought on silver trays of roasted pheasant, truffled potatoes, wine that tasted like summer berries. But she felt the isolation. No one spoke to her. The servants who brought the food were mute. The king did not appear. It wasn't until the 3rd evening, as the sun bled out into the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and black, that the door between her room and the nursery creaked open. Elara was sitting by the fire, mending a tear in one of the new dresses she had been given, a habit she couldn't break. She looked up. Isolde stood in the doorway. She looked better. Her color had returned, a pale, luminous cream instead of chalky white. Her hand was still bandaged, but she held it naturally at her side. She was wearing a white nightgown that made her look like a ghost. "You stayed?" the girl whispered. Elara set the sewing down and stood up slowly. "I promised I would." Isolde took a hesitant step into the room. She looked around as if checking for traps. Then she looked at Elara. "My hand. It itches." Elara smiled, a genuine, warm smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "That means it's healing. It's a good sign." "Father says you are my companion now," Isolde said, tilting her head. "That means you belong to me." "I am here to help you," Elara corrected gently. "To be your friend if you'll let me?" "I don't have friends," Isolde said matter-of-factly. "I have subjects." "Well," Elara said, walking over to the small table where a tray of untouched tea cakes sat. "Even subjects can share a cake. Do you like honey cakes?" Isolde eyed the cakes. "Varen says I shouldn't eat human food. It makes me sluggish." "Varen isn't here," Elara said conspiratorially. She picked up a cake, and they are very good. Sweet, warm. Isolde hesitated. Then, with a burst of childish defiance, she snatched the cake from Elara's hand. She took a bite. Her eyes widened. She ate the rest in 2 bites, licking the sticky honey from her fingers. "It is good," she admitted. "See?" Elara smiled. Not everything forbidden is bad. The moment was shattered by a knock on the main door. Not the polite tap of a servant, but a heavy, authoritative thud. The door opened before Elara could speak. It was not the king. It was a woman. She was tall, with hair like liquid gold and eyes of piercing ice blue. She wore a gown of crimson silk that clung to every curve, and jewels that glittered like stars at her throat. She radiated power, beauty, and a cold, sharp malice. Lady Seraphina, the king's advisor. And, as rumor had it, the woman who expected to be the next queen. She swept into the room, her gaze ignoring Isolde completely and landing on Elara. She looked Elara up and down, her lip curling in a sneer of absolute contempt. "So," Seraphina purred, her voice like silk wrapped around a dagger, "this is the stray dog Kaelin has dragged in from the gutter." Elara stiffened. "My name is Elara, my lady. I did not ask for your name, pet," Seraphina said, gliding closer. She smelled of exotic orchids and blood. "Names are for people. You are a novelty." A momentary lapse in judgment on the king's part. She stopped in front of Elara, towering over her. "Enjoy your silk sheets while you can, little mouse. The king gets bored easily. And when he tires of you, ... Well, I am always looking for new ingredients for my garden fertilizer." Isolde stepped forward, her small face setting into a scowl. "Leave her alone, Seraphina. Father said she is under his protection." Seraphina laughed, a tinkling, cruel sound. She reached out and flicked Isolde's nose, a gesture of disrespect that made Elara gasp. "Oh, little princess. Your father says many things, but he is a man, and men have needs that a human nursemaid cannot fulfill. He will remember that soon enough." She turned back to Elara, her eyes flashing red for a split second. "Watch your back, human. The citadel is full of sharp edges. It would be a shame if you fell on one." With a swirl of crimson silk, she turned and left, the heavy scent of her perfume lingering like a poison cloud. Elara stood frozen. The threat was real. She had felt the killing intent radiating off the woman. Isolde grabbed Elara's hand again. "Don't listen to her. She's a witch, a mean witch." Elara looked down at the child. She squeezed her hand back. "I'm not afraid of witches," she lied. But as she looked at the closed door, Elara knew one thing for certain. She had entered a game she didn't know how to play. And the other players were immortal, bloodthirsty, and playing for keeps. That night, Elara dreamed of wolves. But in the dream, The wolf didn't have yellow eyes. It had eyes of violet fire, and it was standing over her, protecting her from a serpent with golden scales. The next morning, the real work began. The weeks that followed were a lesson in navigating a minefield blindfolded. The Citadel was a place of rigid schedules and silent judgments, a clockwork world of blood and stone where every movement was calculated. Alara learned quickly that silence was the preferred language of the highborn. Servants glided like wraiths. Nobles spoke in hushed, clipped tones that carried the weight of centuries into this mausoleum of power. Ilara brought noise. She hummed while she brushed Isolda's hair. She opened the heavy velvet drapes to let in the pale, watery sunlight that the vampires detested but tolerated. She read stories aloud, human stories about knights and dragons and clever peasant girls doing different voices for each character until Isolde giggled, a sound that seemed to crack the plaster of the nursery walls. It was during one of these reading sessions in the royal library that the king found them. The library was a cavernous space, a cathedral of knowledge with shelves that stretched up into the gloom, accessible only by floating ladders. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through the stained glass. Isolde was sitting on a rug, surrounded by piles of books, while Alara sat cross-legged opposite her, acting out a scene from a battered paperback she had found in the servants' quarters. And then Alara declared, brandishing a paper knife she had borrowed from a desk. The baker threw a pie right in the goblin's face. Splat! Isolde laughed, clapping her hands. It was a genuine, belly-deep laugh that transformed her face from a mask of trauma into the visage of a normal 10-year-old girl. Do the goblin voice again? Isolde begged. I shall. Ilara growled, puffing out her cheeks. My face. It smells of blueberry. A shadow fell over them. The laughter died instantly in Isolde's throat. She scrambled to her feet, smoothing her dress, her eyes darting to the floor. Alara froze, the paper knife still raised in a mock-threatening gesture. Kalen stood at the end of the aisle. He was wearing a long coat of velvet the color of dried blood, open to reveal the black armor he seemed to never fully shed. He held a leather-bound tome in one hand, his fingers long and pale against the dark binding. He was staring at them, not with anger, but with that same unnerving, scientific curiosity he had shown in the tavern. Ilara slowly lowered the knife and scrambled to her feet, seeing awkwardly. My lord, I heard, Kalen said, his voice smooth and deep, sliding through the quiet air. He walked toward them. You are telling her stories of pastry warfare. Ilara flushed. It's a fable, sire, about outsmarting a stronger opponent using what you have at hand. I see. Kalen stopped a few feet away. He looked at his daughter. Isolde, your combat tutor, Master Draven, informs me you missed your lesson today. Isolde shrank back, gripping Ilara's skirt. I didn't want to go, father. Draven yells, and he hits me with the practice stick when I can't make the shadows come. Kellen's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the library seemed to drop 10 degrees. Pain is a teacher, Isolde. You must learn to defend yourself. The world is not made of blueberry pies. It is made of wolves. She's 10 years old, my lord, Ilara interjected. The silence that followed was deafening. Ilara bit her tongue, her heart hammering. She had interrupted the king. Again, Kalen turned his head slowly to look at her, and Ilara continued, her voice shaking but determined. Fear shuts down the mind. If she is terrified of the teacher, she cannot learn the lesson. She spends all her energy trying not to be hit, rather than trying to use her magic. Kalen studied her. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. Ilara had to crane her neck to look him in the eye. She could smell him-thought intoxicating mix of rain and iron. You speak of magic as if you understand it, he murmured. You, who have none. I understand children, Ilara said. And I understand fear. I lived in the lower city, remember? I know what it's like to be afraid of the strong. Kellen's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you afraid of me, Ilara? Yes, she whispered honestly. Terrified. Good. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. Keep that fear. It will keep you alive. He pulled back and looked at Isolde. There will be no lesson with Draven today, but tomorrow you will attend. And you, he pointed a gloved finger at Alara, will go with her. If you believe his methods are flawed, then you shall observe and offer a better alternative. I will, Alara said. We shall see. Kalen turned to leave, his cloak swirling around him. And Alara. Yes, my lord. The goblin voice was ... adequate. He vanished into the shadows of the stacks. Alara let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 10 minutes. She looked at Isolde, whose eyes were wide. He didn't yell, Isolde whispered. He usually yells when I miss lessons. Maybe he's learning too, Alara said, squeezing the girl's hand. But inside, she was trembling. She had just challenged the king's parenting and his military protocol. She was walking a razor's edge. The training grounds were a stark contrast to the library. Located in a sunken courtyard open to the gray, churning sky, the floor was packed dirt-stained with the history of violence. Racks of weapon swords, glaives, whips lined the stone walls. Master Draven was a brute of a vampire. Broad-shouldered with skin, scarred by silver burns, and a nose that had been broken more than once. He looked at Alara with open disdain as she stood on the sidelines, wrapped in a thick cloak against the wind. The human nursemaid watches. Draven sneered, spitting on the ground. Does the king expect you to catch your tears? I am here to observe, Alara said coldly. Proceed. Draven turned his attention to Isolde, who stood in the center of the ring, looking tiny and fragile in her leather training gear. Again, Draven barked. Summon the shadow shield. Now, Isolde squeezed her eyes shut, her hands trembling. Faint wisps of black smoke curled from her fingers, but they dissipated instantly in the wind. Pathetic. Draven roared. He cracked a long, thin cane against his boot. The sound was like a gunshot. You are of the blood royal. You are a predator. Stop cowering like a rabbit. He lunged forward, swinging the cane. He didn't aim to break bones, but to sting, to shock her into reaction. Isolde shrieked and ducked, covering her head. The cane whistled over her shoulder. Don't hit her. Alara shouted, stepping forward to the edge of the ring. Stay back, human. Draven growled. He swung again, this time catching Isolde on the arm. Isolde cried out, clutching her arm. Alara didn't think. The red mist of protective rage descended. She vaulted over the low stone wall of the ring. It wasn't a graceful move. She landed awkwardly in the mud. But she scrambled up and ran between the vampire master and the girl. Draven raised the cane again, his eyes glowing red. Move, woman, or I will cut you down. She is hurt. Alara yelled, spreading her arms to shield Isolde. She needs a break. You are teaching her nothing but panic. I am teaching her survival. Draven snarled. And you are in the way. He brought the cane down. He meant to hit Alara, to knock her aside with enough force to break a rib. Alara braced herself, squeezing her eyes shut. Whack! The sound was sickening. But Alara didn't feel it. She opened her eyes. Isolde was standing in front of her. The girl had moved with supernatural speed, placing herself between Alara and the blow. But she hadn't taken the hit with her body, hovering in the air. Inches from Isolde's outstretched hand was a wall of solid, writhing darkness, a shadow shield. It was dense, black as obsidian, and it had caught the cane mid-swing. Draven's eyes bulged. Impossible ... Isolde's eyes were glowing a fierce royal violet. Her face was contorted not with fear, but with protective fury. Do not, Isolde hissed, her voice sounding like two stones grinding together. Touch her. The cane shattered against the shield. Silence fell over the courtyard. Draven stumbled back, looking at the 10-year-old girl with genuine fear. The power she had just manifested was immense. Far beyond what a fledgling should possess, Alara stared at the back of Isolde's head. The girl wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting Alara Isolde. Alara whispered. The shield vanished instantly. Isolde swayed, her knees buckling as the energy left her. Ilara caught her before she hit the mud. "I did it," Isolde mumbled, her eyes drooping. "I made the shield." "You did," Ilara said, hugging her tight, not caring about the mud. "You were amazing." Slow clapping echoed from the balcony above. Ilara looked up. Kaelin was leaning against the stone railing, looking down at them. He had seen everything. "Psst." Draven Kylan called down, his voice deceptively light. Draven fell to his knees in the mud, bowing so low his forehead touched the dirt. "Sire, the girl. She finally, ... You failed to draw out her power for 3 years, Kaelin said. The human did it in 3 minutes. Sire, you are dismissed, Kaelin said calmly. Report to the northern garrison. You will train the recruits there, assuming the cold does not freeze your tongue." Draven scrambled up and fled the courtyard without a backward glance. Kaelin vaulted over the railing, dropping 20 feet to the ground with the grace of a cat. He landed silently in the mud and walked toward Ilara and Isolde. He looked at his daughter, who was resting her head on Ilara's shoulder. "You summoned a shield to protect a human." Isolde nodded sleepily. She stood in front of me. "She doesn't have magic, Papa. She would have broken." Kaelin looked at Ilara. His gaze traveled over her mud-stained dress, her messy hair, the fierce set of her jaw. "You shielded her with your body," Kaelin said, "knowing you could not stop the blow." "I couldn't let him hurt her," Ilara said. Kaelin reached out. His hand, usually so cold, hovered near Ilara's face. He brushed a smudge of mud from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was intimate, startling. Ilara's breath hitched. "Seems," Kaelin murmured, "that your theory was correct. She fights not for survival, but for love. A dangerous motivation, but effective." He withdrew his hand. "Clean her up. Tonight is the Blood Moon Ball. The entire court will be there, including Seraphina." Ilara's stomach dropped. "Do we have to go?" "Isolde must be presented." "To show she is recovering," Kaelin said. "And you must attend as well." "Me?" Ilara squeaked. "My lord, I am a servant. I don't belong at a ball." "Shh. You are her companion," Kaelin said. "And after what happened in the tavern, the court is curious. They want to see the human who bewitched the king's daughter." He leaned in close again. "And perhaps I want you there." Before Ilara could decipher that cryptic statement, he turned and walked away, his black coat billowing behind him like smoke. The preparation for the ball was a torture session in itself. Servants descended on Ilara's room, scrubbing her, oiling her hair, and lacing her into a corset that felt like it was trying to rearrange her internal organs. The dress Kaelin had sent was not the modest attire of a servant. It was a gown of deep midnight blue velvet, the color of the sky just before total darkness. It had long sleeves of sheer gossamer silk and a neckline that was elegant but daring. It was a dress for a noblewoman, not a waitress. When Ilara looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. The grime of the lower city was gone. In its place was a woman who looked ... dangerous. "You look like a queen," Isolde said from the doorway. She was dressed in a miniature version of court attire, a silver dress that made her look like a star. "I look like a fraud," Ilara muttered, smoothing the velvet over her hips. "But thank you, sweetling." They walked down the grand staircase together. The great hall was transformed. Thousands of black candles floated in midair. The floor was a polished mirror of obsidian. The air was thick with the scent of perfumes, wine, and the metallic tang of blood refreshments for the vampire elite. The music was haunting. Cade played by an orchestra of skeletal musicians. The room was filled with hundreds of vampires, all beautiful, all deadly. When the herald announced His Majesty, King Kaelin, Her Highness, Princess Isolde, and the royal companion, the room went silent. Ilara felt 1,000 pairs of eyes dissecting her. She felt naked despite the velvet. She gripped Isolde's hand tightly. They descended the stairs. Kaelin waited at the bottom. He wore formal attire, a tunic of black brocade with silver embroidery, and a crown of jagged iron on his brow. He looked like a dark god. He offered his arm to Alara. The court gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. "My lord," Ilara whispered, panic rising in her throat. "I should walk behind you." "Walk with me," Kaelin commanded softly. "Head up. Do not look at them. Look at me." Alara took his arm. His muscle was hard as stone beneath the fabric. She focused on his profile, on the sharp line of his jaw, ignoring the sea of predators watching her every step. They moved through the crowd. The vampires parted like the Red Sea, bowing low, but their eyes were sharp, filled with jealousy and hunger. "A bold choice, sire," a voice purred. Lady Seraphina stepped out of the crowd. She was wearing a dress of blood-red scales that shimmered like liquid fire. She looked magnificent and terrifying. Kaelin stopped. "Seraphina." "Bringing a pet to the ball," Seraphina said, her eyes flicking to Alara with amusement. "Is she the entertainment or the main course?" A few courtiers tittered nervously. "She is the guest of honor," Kaelin said, his voice cool. "She saved the princess's life. Which is more than I can say for you, Seraphina. Where were you when my daughter was bleeding?" Seraphine's smile faltered. "I was attending to matters of state, Kaelin." "As you were not." "Indeed." Kaelin turned to Ilara. "Dance with me." Ilara froze. I don't know the steps, my lord." "I will lead," he said. "You simply follow." He swept her onto the dance floor. The orchestra shifted to a waltz, slow, melancholic, and deeply romantic. Kaelin placed one hand on her waist, his grip firm and possessive. He took her other hand in his dot. The contact was electric. Alara felt heat flood her cheeks. She was dancing with the king in front of his court, in front of the woman who wanted to kill her. "They hate me," Alara whispered, staring at the cravat at his throat. "They envy you," Kaelin corrected. "There is a difference. Why are you doing this?" Alara asked, finally looking up into his violet eyes. "Why parade me around? It puts a target on my back." "The target was already there," Kaelin said. "I am merely making it clear that to hit the target, they must go through me." He spun her, the world blurring into a streak of candlelight and shadow. For a moment, it was just the two of them, the monster and the girl. "You smell of fear again," Kaelin noted, pulling her slightly closer than propriety allowed. "I am dancing with a predator," Alara said. "And yet," Kaelin murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips, "you are not running." "I can't run in these heels," Alara retorted. A low rumble of a laugh escaped Kellen's chest. It was a sound that vibrated through Alara's body. He smiled, a genuine small smile. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less like a statue and more like a man. "You are refreshing, Alara. You do not fawn. You do not plot. You simply ... are." The music swelled. The dance ended. Kaelin held her for a beat longer than necessary before releasing her as they stepped back. A scream pierced the air. It came from the balcony. "My son," a woman shrieked. "Help, he's fallen." The crowd surged toward the balcony doors. Kaelin moved instantly, his face hardening back into the king's mask. Ilara followed, pushed along by the tide of bodies on the terrace. A noble woman was leaning over the stone railing, hysterical. Below, on a narrow ledge jutting out over the abyss of the ocean, a young vampire boy, older than 7, was clinging to a gargoyle. He had slipped. If he fell, he wouldn't die. He was immortal, but the drop was hundreds of feet into crushing waves and jagged rocks. He would be broken, washed away, lost to the sea for eternity. The ledge was too narrow for an adult vampire to land on without knocking the boy off. The winds were too high to fly. "The guards," Kaelin barked. "Get a rope. There's no time." The mother screamed. "He's slipping." The boy's fingers were sliding on the wet stone. He was crying, terrified. Alara looked at the ledge. It was narrow, deadly. But she was small, and she had spent years climbing the rotted scaffolding of the lower city to fix her roof. She kicked off her heels. Alara? No, Kaylin warned, seeing the look in her eyes. He reached for her. She dodged his hand. He can't hold on, Kaylin. It was the first time she had used his name without a title. She hiked up the heavy, velvet skirt and climbed onto the railing. The wind hit her like a physical blow, tearing at her hair. The drop was dizzying. The ocean roared below, a black maw waiting to swallow her. She's mad, someone whispered. A human trying to be a hero. Ilara didn't listen. She lowered herself over the edge, finding a foothold on the slippery stone. She clung to the vines growing on the wall. Hold on. She shouted down to the boy. Look at me. Don't look down. She shimmied down the wall, her toes searching for purchase. The rough stone tore at her silk stockings, scraping her skin. She reached the ledge. It was barely a foot wide. The boy was sobbing, his eyes red with terror. I've got you, Alara said, flattening herself against the wall. She inched toward him. I want my mommy. The boy wailed. I know. I'm going to take you to her. Lara reached out. Give me your hand. The boy let go of the gargoyle with one hand and grabbed Alara's. His grip was surprisingly strong vampire strength. He yanked her. Alara slipped. The crowd above gasped. "ELARA," single quotes S foot slid off the edge. She dangled for a heart-stopping second, suspended by one hand gripping a vine. Her shoulders screamed in protest. She swung wildly over the abyss. Alara. Kellen's voice was a roar of panic. She gritted her teeth, found her footing again, and hauled herself back up. She didn't stop. She grabbed the boy firmly by the waist. I've got him. She yelled. Pull us up. She couldn't climb back up with the boy. She needed help. Kalen didn't wait for a rope. He leaped over the railing, holding onto the stone balustrade with one hand, and extended his other hand down as far as he could reach. Take my hand, Kalen commanded. Alara lifted the boy up. Kalen grabbed the child by the collar and hauled him up effortlessly, passing him to the sobbing mother. Then he reached down again for Ilara. Now you. Alara reached up. Her fingers brushed his glove. Suddenly, the vine she was holding snapped. Alara fell. The scream was torn from her throat as the wind rushed past her ears. She saw the balcony receding, saw Kellen's face twisted in horror. She plummeted toward the Blackwater dot, but she didn't hit the water. Something slammed into her in midair. Hard arms wrapped around her waist, crushing the air from her lungs. A cloak whipped around her face. Calen. He had jumped after her. He caught her, twisting his body in the air to take the impact. They slammed into the water together. The cold was shocking. It felt like 1,000 needles piercing her skin. The dark ocean churned around them, pulling them down. But Kalen held her. He didn't need to breathe. He kicked his supernatural strength, propelling them upward against the current. They broke the surface. A gasping well. Alara gasped. Kalen just shook his wet hair, treading water in the violent swell. You foolish, impossible woman, Kalen growled, his voice wet and raw. You jumped. Ilara coughed, spitting out salt water. She clung to his shoulders, shivering violently. The boy is safe, Kalen snapped. And you nearly killed yourself. He began to swim toward the shore, towing her with him. They washed up on a jagged strip of beach at the base of the cliffs. Kalen dragged her out of the surf and onto the black sand. Alara lay there, shivering uncontrollably, her velvet dress heavy and ruined, her hair plastered to her face. Kalen knelt over her. He wasn't cold now. He was burning with a strange heat. He ripped off his soaked coat and wrapped it around her, then pulled her into his arms, pressing her against his chest to share his body heat. Why? He demanded, staring into her eyes. Why risk your life for a stranger? For a monster's child. Alara's teeth chattered. She looked up at him, her vision blurry. Because no one else was moving? Kalen stared at her. The anger in his face melted away, replaced by something else. Awe, and a deep, terrifying hunger that had nothing to do with blood. "You are not human," he whispered. "You cannot be. No human has a heart this big." He brushed the wet hair from her face. His hand lingered on her cheek. His thumb traced her lower lip. Ilara stopped shivering. The world narrowed down to his eyes, the violet fire consuming her. "Kaylin," she breathed. He leaned down. His lips parted. He was going to kiss her, or bite her. She didn't know, and heaven help her, she didn't care, sire. The shout came from above. Guards were descending the cliff path, torches blazing. Kaylin froze. He pulled back inches, his chest heaving. He looked up at the approaching lights, then back at Ilara. The moment was broken, but the energy between them was still crackling, dangerous and undeniable. He scooped her up into his arms, standing as if she weighed nothing. "We will finish this discussion," he promised darkly. "When you are dry," as he carried her up the cliff. Ilara pressed her face into his wet shirt. She had survived the fall, but she had a feeling the real fall, the one into love with the King of Shadows, had just begun. And there would be no safety net for that dot. The fire in the king's private solar was not merely a source of heat. It was a roaring beast of magical flames, consuming logs of ironwood that crackled with blue sparks. Ilara sat before it, buried beneath a mountain of furs, her teeth finally ceasing their chatter. She was no longer in the ruined velvet gown. She wore one of Kellen's tunics, which engulfed her small frame. The cuffs rolled up 3 times to free her hands. Kalen stood by the mantel, a glass of dark, viscous wine in his hand. He had changed as well, into loose trousers and a fresh shirt, but he was barefoot. It was a domestic detail that felt shockingly intimate in the grand, imposing room. He wasn't looking at the fire. He was watching her, his gaze intense and brooding, tracking the color slowly returning to her cheeks. "You are mortal," he said, the statement hanging in the air like an accusation. "Your body is fragile. The fall should have stopped your heart. The cold water should have seized your lungs." Lara wrapped her hands around a mug of hot herbal tea laced with restorative tonic. "But it didn't." "Because I was there," Kalen countered, his voice dropping. "If I had been a second later, if I had hesitated." The glass in his hand cracked. He didn't seem to notice the shards digging into his palm or the wine dripping like blood onto the hearth. "Kalen," Ilara said softly. He flinched at the use of his name. He set the broken glass down and walked toward her, dropping to one knee on the rug. He took her hands, checking her temperature. His skin was cool, soothing against her feverish warmth. "Why?" he asked again, the question that had plagued him since the beach. "Why did you jump?" "I told you," Ilara whispered, looking into the violet abyss of his eyes. The boy was falling. "I guess he is a vampire. He would have survived the water. Broken, yes, but alive, you would have been crushed." Kalen tightened his grip on her hands. "Do you value your life so little?" "I didn't think about the value," Ilara admitted. "I just saw a mother screaming. I saw a child scared. My body just ... moved." Kalen stared at her, his expression a mix of frustration and wonder. "It is a defect," he murmured. "This ... empathy. It overrides your survival instinct. It makes you weak," Ilara countered, feeling a sudden surge of boldness. "It makes me strong in a way you don't understand." Kalen went still. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. The scent of the storm was overwhelming. "Perhaps? Or perhaps it just makes you dangerous. To yourself. And to me, to you. You make me irrational," Kalen confessed, the words torn from him. "I am the king. I am the rock upon which this kingdom stands. I do not panic. I do not abandon my court to dive off cliffs. I do not feel fear." He brushed his knuckles against her cheek. "Until tonight." Lara's heart hammered against her ribs. "You were afraid." "I was terrified," Kalen whispered. "The thought of this silence, the thought of this world without your noise in it, it was unacceptable." He closed the distance. His lips brushed hers a feather-light touch, tentative testing. It wasn't the devouring kiss of a predator. It was the reverent touch of a man discovering a relic. Elara gasped, her eyes fluttering shut. She leaned into him, her hands finding purchase in his hair. The kiss deepened, growing hungry, desperate. He tasted of wine and power. The heat between them flared, brighter than the magical fire. Kalen groaned low in his throat, his arms coming around her, pulling her flush against him. For a moment there was no king, no waitress, no vampires or humans. Just the desperate, magnetic pull of two souls colliding. A polite cough from the doorway shattered the world. Kalen tore himself away, his fangs descending in a snarl of pure fury as he whipped his head toward the intruder. Elara scrambled back into the furs, her face burning. It was the steward, the severe woman who had shown Elara to her room. She looked pale, keeping her eyes firmly fixed on the floor. "Sire," she quavered, "forgive the intrusion." "But the council." "Lord Valeris demands an audience. They say the incident at the ball has caused ... unrest." Kalen closed his eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He visibly reassembled himself, the mask of the king sliding back into place. When he opened his eyes, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by cold steel. "Tell Valerius," Kalen said, his voice ice, "that if he disturbs me again before sunrise, I will mount his head on a pike." He insists it is urgent, sire. Lady Seraphina is stirring up the high houses. She claims the human. That Elara used blood magic to bewitch the boy into falling to stage a rescue. Lara gasped. "What?" Kalen stood up slowly. The air in the room grew heavy, the shadows lengthening and twisting like snakes. "She dares." He turned to Elara. "Stay here. Do not leave this room. Do not open the door for anyone but me." Kalen Elara reached out. "She's trying to bait you." "She has succeeded," Kalen said grimly. He looked at her one last time, his eyes lingering on her swollen lips. "Rest, Elara. I will handle the wolves." He swept out of the room, the heavy door slamming shut, leaving Elara alone with the fire and the taste of the king on her lips. The next morning, the citadel was a hive of whispers. Elara could feel them as she walked down the corridor toward the nursery. Servants stopped sweeping to stare. Guards watched her with a new, calculating expression. She wasn't just the pet anymore. She was the catalyst of a scandal. When she entered the nursery, she expected fear. Instead, she was tackled. "Elara?" Isolde slammed into her, hugging her waist tightly. "You're alive. Varen said you fell into the sea. He said the crabs ate you." "Varen has a vivid imagination," Elara said, laughing breathlessly as she hugged the girl back. "I am very much alive. And crab-free." Isolde pulled back, looking her up and down. "Papa saved you. He did." Good Isolde stated firmly. "If he hadn't, I would have bitten him." Elara choked on a laugh. "I'm sure he would have been terrified." "I made you something," Isolde said, grabbing Elara's hand and dragging her toward the table. Spread out on the parchment was a drawing. It was crude, done in charcoal and red ink. It showed a stick figure with long hair Elara holding a smaller stick figure the boy, while a large black-winged figure Kalen swooped down. But what caught Elara's eye was the yellow circle drawn around the Elara figure. "What is this?" Elara asked, touching the yellow halo. "It's your light," Isolde said simply. "Everyone here is gray or red or black. You are yellow, like the sun. It hurts to look at sometimes, but it's warm." Elara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, sweetling. I love it." "The bad lady doesn't like your light," Isolde whispered, leaning in close. "Seraphina. She was here this morning, looking for you." Elara went cold. "Here, in the nursery. She asked where you sleep," Isolde said. "I told her you sleep in the fireplace because you are a dragon in disguise." Despite the fear, Elara smiled. "Clever girl. She left a present." "For you," Isolde pointed to a small black velvet box on the mantelpiece.elara, approached it cautiously. It looked innocent enough. She opened the lid. Inside lay a necklace. It was beautiful, a choker of black lace and obsidian. But as Alara reached for it, a chill ran up her arm. "Don't touch it," a deep voice commanded. Ilara snatched her hand back. Kalen stood in the doorway. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his clothes rumpled as if he hadn't slept. He walked over, picked up the box with a gloved hand, and inspected it. "A choker of silence," he murmured. "Enchanted. If you wear it, it tightens every time you try to speak. Eventually, it crushes the windpipe." Ilara stared at the necklace in horror. "She wants to silence me." "She wants to erase you," Kalen said. He crushed the box in his hand, the wood splintering, the necklace snapping with a sharp pop. He tossed the debris into the fire. "The council's session was ... difficult. Serafina has rallied the conservative factions. They believe my attachment to you is a sign of madness. They are calling for a tribunal. A tribunal. A trial," Kalen said wearily, "to determine if I am fit to rule, or if I have been compromised by a human sorceress." "But that's ridiculous. I have no magic. Truth matters little in politics, Alara. Perception is everything. They see a king who dove into the ocean for a servant. They see weakness." He ran a hand through his hair. "I have bought us time. I invoked the right of blood. A challenge." Ilara felt sick. What kind of challenge? "In 3 days during the Eclipse Festival, I must prove my strength. I must face the champions of the high houses in the arena. If I win, they bow. If I lose, if you lose, then I am deposed. And you and Asoda." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. If Kalen fell, Ilara and Isolde would be at Seraphine's mercy. "You have to fight because of me," Ilara whispered. "I caused this." "No," Kalen said fiercely, grabbing her shoulders. "You revealed the cracks that were already there. Serafina has been waiting for an excuse to strike for decades. If it wasn't you, it would have been something else. But I am glad it is you. Why? Because you are worth fighting for." The confession hung in the air, heavy and sweet. Kalen looked at Isolde, who was watching them with wide eyes. "Isolde," he said gently, "go with your nurse. I need to speak to Alara alone." Isolde hesitated, then nodded. "Don't let the bad lady win, Papa. Never." When they were alone, Kalen turned to Alara. "I cannot protect you in the citadel right now. Serafina has assassins in the shadows. I need to move you." "Move me where?" "The Winter Palace," Kalen said. "It is in the mountains, a day's ride from here. It is secluded, ancient, my personal stronghold. Seraphine's influence does not reach there. If you're sending me away..." Ilara felt a pang of panic. "I am taking you there," Kalen corrected. "We leave within the hour. Azolda will come too. We will stay there until the festival. I need to prepare for the rite, and I cannot do that if I am constantly watching the shadows for daggers aimed at your back." The journey to the Winter Palace was different from the ride to the Citadel. They rode on horseback, not in a carriage. Kalen rode a massive black destrier that looked like it ate other horses for breakfast. Alara was given a gentle gray mare. Isolde rode with her father, perched in front of him on the saddle. They traveled through the ancient forests of Oakhaven. The trees here were massive, their trunks as wide as houses, their leaves a permanent autumn gold. It was beautiful but eerie. The woods were silent save for the thud of hooves. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the air grew thin and sharp. Snow began to fall, large soft flakes that coated the world in silence. The Winter Palace emerged from the mist like a dream. It was carved directly into the face of a glacier, a structure of white stone and blue ice. It looked ethereal, fragile, yet it had stood for 1,000 years. "It's beautiful," Alara breathed. "It is cold," Kalen said, "but it is safe." Inside, the palace was surprisingly warm, heated by geothermal springs that ran beneath the ice. The floors were covered in thick white furs. The windows looked out over a sea of clouds. There were no courtiers here, no guards, just a skeleton crew of ancient, silent servants who had served, Kellen's family since before the Great War, for the first time since arriving in the vampire world. Ilara felt a sense of peace. That evening, after Isolde had been tucked into a bed made of carved ivory, Ilara found Kellen on the balcony, watching the snow fall. He had shed his armor, wearing only a loose white shirt and trousers. He looked like a fallen angel against the backdrop of the storm. "You should be resting," Ilara said, wrapping her shawl tighter around herself. "You have a fight in 3 days." "I do not need sleep," Kellen said. "I need clarity." He turned to look at her. The moonlight reflected off the snow lit up his face, softening the sharp angles. "Tell me about your life, Ilara, before the tavern." "Before me, there isn't much to tell," Ilara said, leaning against the icy railing. "My parents died when I was young. Plague. My sister and I were taken in by an aunt who, didn't really want us. I started working as soon as I was tall enough to reach the bar tap." "You have struggled," Kellen noted. "Everyone struggles in the lower city." "My lord, it's how we know we're alive." "Kellen," he corrected her. "Here, in this place, I am just Kellen." "Kellen," she tested the name again. It felt heavy on her tongue, intimate. "And you? What was your life like before all this?" Kellen laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "There was no before I was born to this. Bred for it. My first memory is of my father handing me a sword. My second is of him telling me that love is a weakness that gets kings killed." "He was wrong," Ilara said firmly. Kellen looked at her. "Was he? My wife? The queen? She was the only thing I ever loved. And because of that, my enemies targeted her. They poisoned her slowly over years. I didn't see it until it was too late. I watched her wither. I held her when she died." Lara's heart ached for him. "That is why you are so hard on Isolde. Why you push her away." "I push her away so she does not become a target," Kellen said, his voice cracking. "If I do not love her, they cannot use her against me. If I am cold, she is safe." "But she isn't safe," Ilara said, stepping closer. "She is lonely. And she is breaking. You can't protect someone by starving them of affection, Kellen. That's a slow death, too." Kellen looked at her, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears he had held back for a century. "You undo me, Ilara. You strip away my armor layer by layer." "Good," Ilara said. She reached out and placed her hand on his chest over his heart. It was beating slowly, a heavy, powerful rhythm. "Someone has to." Kellen covered her hand with his own. "If I lose the right, you won't. If I do, you must take Isolde. There are tunnels beneath this palace. They lead to the coast. There is a ship there, paid for, waiting. You take her and you run. You go to the human lands, you never look back." "I am not leaving you," Ilara said fiercely. "Ilara." "No," she interrupted. "I am done running. You fight for your crown. I will fight for us." The word hung between them. Us.Calen stared at her, searching for any sign of hesitation. He found none. With a groan of surrender, he pulled her into his arms. This time there was no hesitation, no interruption. He kissed her, and it was like the storm outside, wild, consuming, inevitable. He lifted her up, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, clinging to him as he carried her inside. Away from the cold, away from the world. That night, in the heart of the Winter Palace, the king forgot he was a monster. And the waitress forgot she was prey. They were just two lonely souls finding warmth in the dark. The morning of the rite came too soon. The peace of the Winter Palace was shattered by the arrival of the royal guard to escort the king back to the arena, to was silent as he geared up. He wore no ceremonial velvet today. He wore battle armor black steel plate etched with runes of protection, greaves that looked like dragon claws, and a helm that obscured his face. He strapped a massive greatsword to his back. Ilara helped him buckle the straps. Her hands were steady, though her heart was breaking. "You look scary," she tried to joke, smoothing the leather strap at his shoulder. Kellen caught her hand and kissed the palm. "I need to be. He looked at Isolde, who was holding a small handkerchief she had embroidered badly with a dragon. For luck, Papa. Kalen took it and tucked it into his gauntlet against his skin. Thank you, little star. He turned to Alara. Remember the tunnels? If the signal Kumsa red flare you run. I will be watching, Ilara said. I will be cheering. Then I cannot lose, Kalen said. He mounted his horse and rode out, the guards flanking him. Ilara and Isolde watched him go until he was swallowed by the mist. He will win, Isolde said. Her voice small but sure. He has to, Ilara agreed. But as they turned to go back inside, a shadow detached itself from the palace walls. A figure cloaked in illusion, who had bypassed the ancient wards because they had been keyed to invite a guest. Ilara stopped. She smelled orchids and blood. She turned slowly. Serafina stood in the doorway of the Winter Palace, holding a dagger that glowed with a sickly green light. Behind her were 3 mercenaries, their faces covered in masks. Did you really think, Serafina smiled, that I would let him fight with a clear mind? Or that I would leave his little pet unguarded? Alara pushed Isolde behind her. Run, Isolde. The tunnels. Now, but Ilara, go. Ilara screamed. Isolde turned and sprinted toward the hidden door Kalen had shown them. Serafina gestured to the mercenaries. Get the girl. I will deal with the waitress. The men lunged. Elara didn't have a sword. She didn't have magic. She had a heavy brass candlestick from the hallway table. She swung it with all her might. It connected with the first mercenary's knee with a satisfying crunch. He howled. But Serafina was there. She moved with blurring speed. She backhanded Ilara, sending her flying across the room. Ilara hit the wall and slid down, dazed, tasting blood. Serafina loomed over her, the green dagger poised. Kalen will be so distracted by your death that the champion will cut him down in seconds. A tragic romance. A tragic end. Ilara looked up, her vision swimming. She saw the mercenaries chasing Isolde down the hall. No, Ilara gasped. She struggled to rise. Serafina raised the dagger. Goodbye, mouse. She brought it down. The green dagger sliced through the air, aiming for Ilara's heart. Ilara didn't think, she rolled. It was a clumsy, desperate movement, born of panic rather than training. The blade slammed into the floorboards where her chest had been a split second before, sinking deep into the wood with a hiss of dark magic. Slippery little vermin, Serafina snarled. Wrenching the dagger free, Ilara scrambled backward, her hands slipping on the polished floor, kicking a heavy oak chair into Seraphine's path. Serafina swiped the chair aside as if it were made of balsa wood, shattering it against the wall. You think furniture can stop me? Serafina laughed, advancing. I am an elder. I have crushed rebellions. I have slaughtered armies. You are nothing. Ilara hit the wall. There was nowhere left to go. She looked around for a weapon, a vase, a poker, anything, but she was trapped. Now, Serafina purred, raising the dagger again. Hold still. Want to see the light go out of your eyes before I tear Kellen's heart out? Nitrogen monoxide. The scream didn't come from Ilara. From the hallway, a small figure sprinted back into the room. Isolde. She hadn't run to the tunnels. She had come back. Isolde, run. Ilara shrieked, terrified. But Isolde didn't run. She planted her feet, her small face contorted in a mask of pure royal rage. She threw her hands out, palms facing Serafina. Get away from her. The air in the room imploded. It wasn't the defensive shield this time. It was a shockwave of solid shadow. It hit Serafina like a battering ram. The highborn sorceress was lifted off her feet and thrown backward, crashing through the heavy double doors and out into the hallway. The impact cracked the stone lintel. Dust and debris rained down. Ilara stared, stunned. Isolde stood panting, her hands smoking with black residue, her eyes glowing a terrifying, luminous violet. I hit her. Isolde gasped, looking at her hands in shock. Ilara scrambled up and grabbed the girl. You were brilliant. Now we have to go." Now they turned toward the secret passage. But before they could take a step, a cold, invisible hand wrapped around Alara's throat. She gagged, clawing at the air, her feet lifting off the ground. Serafina walked back into the room through the dust. Her dress was torn, her hair wild, and her face was a landscape of pure fury. A trickle of blood, purple and thick, ran down her forehead. "You little brat!" Serafina hissed. She flicked a finger. 11 Isola was slammed against the wall by telekinetic force, pinned there like a butterfly in a display case. She cried out, struggling against the invisible bonds. "Don't touch her!" Alara choked out, kicking uselessly as she dangled in the air. Serafina ignored Isolda and walked up to Alara. She grabbed Alara's chin, digging her nails in. "I was going to kill you quickly," Serafina whispered, her eyes swirling with madness. "But now I think you can serve a better purpose." She smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Alara had ever seen. "The rite is beginning. Kalen is fighting for his crown. Imagine his face when he sees you." Serafina trailed the dagger down Alara's cheek, leaving a thin line of red. "Imagine what he will do when I offer him a trade. His crown. Or his girls. He won't surrender," Alara wheezed. "Oh, he will," Serafina said confidentially, "because he is weak. And you have made him weaker." She turned to the mercenaries who were dragging themselves back into the room, nursing bruises from Isolda's blast. "Bind them," Serafina ordered. "And bring the portal stone. We are going to the arena." The arena of Oakhaven was a coliseum of black marble, built into the crater of a dormant volcano. It could hold 50,000 vampires, and today every seat was filled. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a bloodlust that vibrated in the teeth in the center of the sandy pit. Two figures circled each other. One was a giant, a champion from the northern clans named Ragnar. He wielded a warhammer that sparked with lightning. He was a machine of destruction, favored by the conservative council members who wanted a king of pure brutality. The other was Kalen. He moved like smoke. He was faster, lighter, his greatsword a blur of dark steel. He had taken hits his armor, was dented on the left side, and he was favoring his right leg, but he was winning. Ragnar swung the hammer. Kalen slid under the blow, the electricity singing over his helm. He slashed upward, severing the leather straps of Ragnar's breastplate. The crowd roared, a mix of cheers and boos. "Yield," Kalen shouted, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the pit. "Yield and you live." "Never," Ragnar bellowed. "Death to the human lover." Ragnar charged, a bull made of iron and hate. Kalen didn't flinch. He dropped his stance, centering his energy. As Ragnar brought the hammer down, Kalen sidestepped, grabbed the haft of the weapon, and used the giant's own momentum to throw him. Ragnar crashed into the sand face first. Before he could rise, Kalen's sword was at his throat. "It is over," Kalen said, his chest heaving. The crowd went silent. The referee, a hooded figure from the High Council, stepped forward to declare the victory. Kalen looked up at the royal box where the council sat. He looked for the sign of submission. He had done it. It secured his throne. It protected Alara. Suddenly the massive magical projection screens that floated above the arena, usually showing close-ups of the combat, flickered. The image of Kalen standing over his defeated foe vanished. In its place appeared a new scene. A collective gasp rippled through the 50,000 spectators. On the screen was the royal box, but the council members were gone. Pushed to the side, standing in the center, illuminated by a spotlight, was Serafina, and kneeling before her, bound in chains of glowing magical energy, were Alara and Isolda. Kellen's sword slipped from his hand. It hit the sand with a dull thud. He stared at the screen, his blood turning to ice. Alara was bleeding, a cut on her cheek, a bruise blossoming on her jaw. Isolda was crying, looking terrified. Serafina had a hand tangled in Ilara's hair, pulling her head back to expose her throat to the dagger. "Kalen," Seraphine's voice boomed over the magical speakers. echoing across the crater. Congratulations on your victory. You fought bravely. Kalen ripped his helmet off, revealing a face twisted in absolute horror. Seraphina, if you touch them, I am touching them, my king. Seraphina taunted. She pressed the blade against Elara's skin. A drop of bright red blood welled up. The scent of it, amplified by the arena's magic, wafted down to the pit. The crowd went wild, the vampires frenzied by the smell of fresh human blood. Stop, Kalen roared. He took a step toward the stands, his hands curling into fists. What do you want? Justice Seraphina declared, playing to the crowd. You have tainted our bloodline. You've weakened our laws by harboring this creature. You are unfit to rule. Let them go. I will give you a choice, Seraphina announced, her voice dripping with venom. The crown or the human. She looked down at him from the high box. Surrender, abdicate the throne to the council. Submit to execution for your treason against our traditions. Do that, and I will let the girl and your daughter go. Don't do it, Elara screamed. Her voice was tinny over the speakers, but fierce. Kalen, don't. She's lying. Kill her. Seraphina struck Elara across the face. The sound echoed like a crack of thunder. Elara slumped sideways, dazed. Isolde shrieked. Papa, Kalen let out a sound that wasn't human. It was the roar of a wounded animal. He looked at the council, at the crowd, at Ragnar, who was slowly getting up behind him. You have 10 seconds, Seraphina said. 10. 9. Kalen looked at Elara. He saw the blood on her face. He saw the terror in Asula's eyes. He looked at the crown that sat on a velvet pillow near the referee. The symbol of absolute power. The thing he had been bred to wear. 6. 5. Kalen looked back at Seraphina. I yield, he said. The crowd gasped. Louder. Seraphina crowed. Kalen dropped to his knees in the sand. He bowed his head. I yield. I abdicate. I am no longer king. No, Elara whispered on the screen, tears streaming down her face mixed with blood. You fool! You beautiful fool! Ragnar, sensing the shift, scrambled up. He picked up his hammer. He looked at Seraphina for instruction. Excellent. Seraphina smiled. She looked at the crowd. You heard him. He chooses the meat over the kingdom. He is a traitor. She looked down at Kalen. Sees him? Guards poured into the arena. Dozens of them. They surrounded Kalen, spears leveled. He didn't fight back. He let them bind his hands with heavy iron chains. He let them drag him to the center of the pit. Kalen shouted, looking up at the box. I have done what you asked. Let them go. Seraphina looked at Elara. She looked at Isolde. Then she looked at the dagger in her hand. She laughed. You really are sentimental, aren't you? Seraphina sneered. I promised I would let them go. I didn't say where I would let them go. She grabbed Elara by the arm and dragged her to the edge of the royal box, which overlooked the Pita 50-foot drop onto the stone spikes that lined the arena wall. I think Seraphina shouted that a king who loves a human should die with her. You liar. Kalen surged against the chains, snapping to links with sheer brute force. But 5 guards tackled him, pinning him to the sand. Say goodbye. Little Mouse Seraphina whispered to Elara. Elara looked down. She saw Kalen pinned in the dust, looking up at her with eyes full of agony. She saw the spikes. She saw the end. But she also saw something else. Behind Seraphina, Isolde was no longer bound. The magical chains that held the child had flickered when Seraphina used her power to broadcast her voice. Isolde was standing up, and she was holding something, the candlestick. The brass candlestick Elara had used in the Winter Palace. Isolde had dragged it through the portal. Seraphina raised her hand to push Elara. Isolde swung. She didn't have Elara's height, but she had vampire strength. She brought the heavy brass base down onto the back of Seraphine's knee. Seraphina screamed, her leg buckling. She stumbled forward. Elara seized the moment. She didn't wait to be pushed. She grabbed Seraphine's arm, the arm holding the dagger, and pulled. By go, Elara gritted out, "You're coming with me." Elara threw her weight over the railing. Serafina, off balance and in pain, couldn't stop the momentum. She flailed, trying to grab the railing, but Elara was heavy and gravity was absolute. They both tumbled over the edge. Elara. Kaylin screamed, a sound that shattered the glass of the projection screens. They fell. Wind rushed past them. Serafina was clawing at Elara, trying to use her as a cushion, screaming curses. Elara saw the ground rushing up. She saw Kaylin fighting like a demon, throwing guards aside, trying to reach the drop zone. He wouldn't make it. She was going to die. But as the ground approached, a strange calm washed over her. She had saved Isolde. She had fought for her king. "Close your eyes," she told herself, and then the world turned black. But it wasn't the black of death. It was a soft, billowing, smoke-like blackness. Thump. Elara hit something. It wasn't stone. It wasn't sand. It was soft, like falling into a pile of feathers. She opened her eyes. She was floating 3 feet above the arena floor. Beneath her, cushioning her fall, was a massive, swirling vortex of shadows, and standing in the royal box above, hands outstretched, eyes glowing like twin supernovas, was Isolde. The girl was screaming with effort, her power pouring out in a torrent that darkened the sun. She had caught them. Well, she had caught Elara. Serafina had not been so lucky. Isolde's control wasn't perfect. Or perhaps it was too perfect. The shadow cushion ended exactly where Elara's body ended. Serafina hit the sand next to Elara with a sickening crunch. The sorceress lay there, twisted and broken, moaning in pain. Her magic shattered by the impact. Elara rolled off the shadow cloud as it dissipated, landing softly on her hands and knees. She coughed, spitting out sand. Silence. Absolute silence in the arena. Then. The chains snapping. Kaylin broke the last of his bonds. The guards, terrified by the display of power from the princess and the sudden turn of events, scrambled back. Kaylin ran. He didn't run to kill Serafina. He ran to Elara. He slid to his knees, skidding in the sand, and gathered her into his arms. He was shaking. Violent, uncontrollable tremors racked his armored body. "Elara," he choked out, his hands frantically checking her for broken bones. "Elara, look at me. Breathe." "I'm okay," Elara wheezed, clutching his breastplate. "Isolde. She caught me." Kaylin looked up at the box. Isolde was leaning over the railing, waving frantically, looking exhausted but triumphant. Kaylin looked back at Elara. He buried his face in her neck, letting out a sob of relief that was amplified by the silent arena. "I thought I lost you. I abdicated. I gave it all up." "I know," Elara whispered, stroking his sweat-dampened hair. "I heard you. I would do it again," he vowed against her skin. 1,000 times. A groan from the ground beside them broke the moment. Serafina was trying to crawl away. Her legs were useless, but she was dragging herself with her arms, coughing blood. "It isn't over," she rasped. "The council. The laws." Kaylin stood up. He helped Elara to her feet, keeping one arm firmly around her waist. He looked down at Serafina. The sadness and fear were gone from his face. In their place was the cold, imperial wrath of the Blood Monarch. "You're right," Kaylin said, his voice projecting to the entire arena without the need for magic. "The laws are clear." He looked up at the crowd, at the vampires who had cheered for his death, who had jeered at his sacrifice. "I yielded." Kaylin roared. "I gave up my crown to save an innocent. I showed mercy. And she," he pointed at Serafina, ... she broke the pact. She tried to murder a helpless woman after the terms were met. Who is the traitor here?" The crowd murmured. Vampires valued strength, yes, but they also valued honor and the pact. To break a sworn oath in the arena was the ultimate taboo. "She has no honor." A voice shouted from the stands. "She is a liar." Another cried, "Traitor!" The chant began low, then swelled. "Traitor! Traitor! Traitor!" Serafina looked around, wide-eyed with fear. She had lost the crowd. She had lost the narrative. Kaylin drew a dagger from his boot. He tossed it onto the sand, just out of Seraphine's reach. "I will not kill you," Kaelin said coldly. "That would be too quick. You are exiled. You will walk the wastes until the sun takes you or the madness does." Seraphina sobbed. "Kaelin, please. Mercy." "I used all my mercy on her," Kaelin said, hugging Ilara closer. He turned his back on Seraphina. He looked up at the royal box. "Isolde." He shouted, "Come down here." Isolde didn't take the stairs. She climbed over the railing and jumped. A small parachute of shadows slowed her descent, and she landed in the sand. Kaelin scooped her up with one arm, holding Ilara with the other. He stood in the center of the arena, flanked by his human heart and his powerful daughter. He looked at the council members who were cowering in the box. "I am Kaelin of House Draven," he announced. "I am the king. If anyone wishes to dispute that, come down here and take it." No one moved. Ragnar, the giant champion, looked at Kaelin, then at the broken body of Seraphina. He dropped his hammer and knelt one by one. The guards knelt. The council members slowly bowed their heads. The crowd erupted into cheers, chanting, "Long live the king! Long live the queen!" Ilara stiffened. "Queen?" she whispered. Kaelin looked down at her, a smirk touching his lips, the first genuine smile in days. "Well," he said, wiping a smudge of blood from her cheek, "we can discuss the titles later. But I think Waitress is no longer sufficient." Ilara laughed, a sound of pure relief. She leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the arena. But for the first time in the kingdom of Oakhaven, the night didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. 6 months later, the Ashen Rose Tavern was busier than ever. It had become a tourist destination of sorts, the place where it all began. Gorn was shouting orders, happier than a clam, as the gold coins flowed in. But there was a new plaque above table 4, made of silver and gold, reserved for Her Majesty. Up in the citadel. The nursery was empty. Ilara was in the garden, a real garden now, where she had planted sunflowers and daisies amidst the night-blooming jasmine. She was sitting on a stone bench reading a book on diplomatic relations. "Boring?" a voice said from the branches above. Isolde dropped down, landing lightly. She looked healthy, happy. She wore trousers and a tunic, and a small wooden sword was strapped to her belt. "It is necessary," Ilara said, closing the book. "If I am to help your father with the trade agreements, I need to know who hates whom." "Everyone hates everyone," Isolde shrugged. "Except us. We love everyone, mostly." Speaking of love, Kellen's voice drifted over the hedge. The king walked into the garden. He looked less tired these days. The lines of strain around his eyes had smoothed out. He wore his crown, but his collar was unbuttoned. He walked over to Ilara and kissed her forehead. "The council is arguing about the grain imports again. I need an escape." "And I need a sparring partner," Isolde declared, drawing her wooden sword. "Draven says my footwork is getting sloppy." "Draven is a perfectionist," Kaelin said. He looked at Ilara. "Walk with me." "What about the grain?" Ilara asked, taking his hand. "Let them eat cake," Kaelin said with a wink. They walked through the garden. The three of them a family forged in blood and broken glass, held together by a love that had defied the laws of nature. Ilara looked at her hand. The scars from the dishwater were gone, healed by alchemical salves. But the memory of the waitress who knelt in the glass remained. She squeezed the king's hand. "What are you thinking?" Kaelin asked softly. "I was thinking," Ilara said, looking up at the moon, which was full and bright, "that I'm glad I didn't run." Kaelin stopped. He turned her to face him, his eyes glowing with that familiar, intense violet fire. "So am I, my love," he whispered. "So am I." He kissed her, and around them the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain, ozone, and the sweet, impossible fragrance of sunflowers blooming in the dark.